Excuse me. Let's stay with that story, and I'm joined now by Dr. Robert Kelly. He's a professor of international relations at Busan National University in Busan in South Korea. Thank you for joining us, and good morning to you. Why does North Korea need to carry out these tests, and indeed why does it carry on with these tests?
Sure. The North Koreans have decided that nuclear weapons are the best way to prevent them from being attacked by the United States and by South Korea. The North Koreans have learned from watching the United States in Iraq and Libya and other places in the last 20 years and have decided that a conventional deterrent is not enough and that they need nuclear weapons. They obviously don't have an air force. What they have is very old, and so this is why they keep testing rockets. Eventually, they want to marry the nuclear warhead to the rocket.
And do you think that is likely to happen?
I do. The North Koreans have come a lot further than a lot of us expected. The North Koreans have done a remarkably good job. Actually, it's quite astonishing, actually, how well they've done in developing these weapons over the last 25 years. As everybody knows, there have been enormous efforts made to sanction them and block them from acquiring these things, and a lot of this is done through the black market. They're really cut off from a great deal of illicit trade, and they still managed to pull it off. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they managed to do this in the next few years.
And it would suggest, Doctor, that the sanctions really aren't working, would it not?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big discussion about that. What I would say is I would defend the sanctions by saying that if we didn't have them, it would probably be even worse. Part of the problem also is that some countries, specifically China, haven't cooperated terribly well with sanctions in the past. Now, we have had a new wave of sanctions since the tests in January and February. I'm more optimistic about those because I think they target North Korea's money, which I think is pretty important for it to raise, to acquire these parts. So I'm a little bit optimistic this time.
So what do you think the response is going to be following these tests today?
Well, I mean, there'll probably be some kind of UN action, as there usually is, and there'll be denunciations from the United States and Japan and South Korea, as there usually are. The big questions, of course, will be, do the Chinese respond and do the Russians respond? What will they say? Yeah, I think the Chinese particularly, that's the one that's most important. I do think that the Chinese are getting close to the end of their rope with North Korea. This is always very hard to gauge. But my sense is that the Chinese are losing their patience. That doesn't mean they're going to pull the plug on North Korea or something like that. But that's the real response to watch for in the next, say, week.
So do you think if the Chinese do get on board, these tests would actually stop?
No, but I do think that the Chinese could probably slow them down significantly and raise the costs significantly. And if the Chinese were actually generally really force a breach between themselves and North Korea, I think that would be the death knell of the regime. I think that's really the problem, right? I think the North Koreans will keep going so long as they believe that the environment around them is so threatening that they have to have these weapons. This is, I think, one of the reasons why the Obama administration, we found out, tried to secretly start a deal with the North Koreans in late December. They were trying to sort of push the North Koreans away from going through these tests. But as long as the North Koreans feel like they need these things, they're going to keep going. And I just don't think that the Chinese can provide that kind of existential security guarantee. They'll still go for weapons, nuclear weapons.
Professor, it doesn't seem that they're really concerned about raising tensions, whether it's in the region or further abroad. They've just sentenced an American to 15 years, I believe it is, of hard labor. Why do you think it is that they just don't seem to care, or Kim Jong-un's government just doesn't seem to care?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I'm not entirely sure myself. My own sense is that the North Koreans have gotten accustomed to being coddled. That is to say that the North Koreans during the Cold War, for example, they were able to bounce back and forth between the Soviets and the Chinese, and they were able to do all kinds of stuff, and they didn't really pay a very high penalty. In the last 25 years or so, I think the North Koreans have gotten away with a great deal of stuff that many other states in the world didn't. If you look at what happened to, say, like the dictators of Yugoslavia or Iraq, if you look at the way the United States has responded to other problems in the Middle East, right, the North Koreans have never actually felt that stick. And so I think the North Koreans think that they have more room maybe than they do. But to a certain extent, the Chinese have provided them with that room. The Chinese have sort of generally refused to really sort of clamp down and push hard on North Korea regarding the rocket tests and the nuclear tests because they're afraid North Korea is going to implode. And so it's a difficult balance with the Chinese, right? Well, they push the North Koreans enough to actually get some results without bringing the collapse of the regime.